I spend a bit too much time on Twitter, probably more than is good for me, but sometimes you come across some interesting little snippets. And I want to start off with a tweet that I read the other day, because I disagree with pretty much every word of it, but it frames the discussion this afternoon. This tweet reads as follows: private enterprise is the only solution to COVID-19. Vaccinations, medicines, respirators, masks, testing, new developments, research, all come from private companies using their own money in a race to develop products. Without them, we'd just be digging a lot of plague pits. So that's basically the case for the alternative in 280 characters or less. And I suppose I want to respond to that. But like all bad arguments, there's always just a little snippet of truth. And the snippet of truth in this instance is, when given the chance to make a profit, and maybe a hefty profit, private enterprise does indeed respond. There are currently about 35 companies and academic institutions racing to create a vaccine. We've got to be upfront and say all of them may fail, some of them may succeed. The production of vaccines is not a straightforward process, but it's one that potentially would deliver an absolute goldmine to the company that cracks the code and is able to produce the product. A guy called Gerald Posner, who wrote a book, Pharma, Greed, Lies, and the Poisoning of America, says bluntly, pharmaceutical companies view COVID-19 as a once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity. And the crisis will potentially be a blockbuster for the industry in terms of sales and profits. And of course, from their point of view, he says, the worse the pandemic gets, the higher their eventual profit. So Johnson & Johnson, for instance, has said it will invest $1 billion in a manufacturing plant or several manufacturing plants to make 1 billion doses of vaccine. They haven't yet developed the vaccine, but they're obviously gambling that once they crack the secret, they will make a fortune out of each of those doses. There's another company called Moderna, which is in the chase for a vaccine. And while the stock market has gone down by about 12%, Moderna's shares have gone up about 10% over the same period. And I read one financial journalist who wrote that if Moderna prices its vaccine at around $600, and apparently that's bargain basement for this kind of stuff, and just half the population of Hubei province in China had it, Moderna would gross $37 billion. So you begin to see gigantic possibilities for mega profits. And when that possibility comes along, then capitalists will respond in all sorts of avaricious ways. 150, 160 years ago, Karl Marx wrote in Capital. He didn't actually use these words himself. He was quoting an economist called T.J. Dunning, but he wrote, or he recorded Dunning saying, with adequate profit, capital is very bold. A certain 10% will ensure its employment anywhere, 20% certain will produce eagerness, 50% positive audacity, 100% will make it ready to trample on all human laws, 300%, and there is not a crime at which it will scruple, nor a risk it will not run, even to the chance of its owner being hanged. So yes to our tweeting pro-business friend, capital will respond to the possibility of a profit, but in doing so, it will respond in a chaotic way, as Marx wrote elsewhere. A band of warring brothers, each of them trying to stake their claim in the goldfield before the others can make it. And so while on the one hand, capital is responding to coronavirus, it's doing so in a chaotic and at times counterproductive way. None of those companies are collaborating. Each of them have their own team of scientists who are attempting to develop vaccines to first test on animals and then on humans. There is some collaboration, it should be said. The fact that these companies, some of them are already going to the first round of testing, is because the Chinese government actually tracked the genome of the COVID virus and shared that information. So that gave every company a flying start. But beyond that, each of them is in it for itself. And that can lead to a duplication of work. It can lead to outright competition. It can lead to fights over scarce resourcing. So this is even the case inside Australia. Forget about the rest of the world. There's a team at Monash led by Professor Colin Pouton, and they've been developing a vaccine. They've actually got to the stage of applying for animal testing, but they're doing essentially the exact same thing as another organisation in the United States, working against each other rather than working in collaboration. The gains are too great to want to let others in on the game. Professor Marnie Hughes-Warrington, who's a Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of South Australia, sort of echoed Marx, but in a much more polite way, by saying that in the rush to treatments, people would trip over each other a little bit, which I think is what Marx was talking about with the 300% profit. And another researcher, Dr. Julian Clark, says Australian science is generally characterised as being highly fragmented. So right from the get-go, the rush for profit means that there are multiple players in the race rather than a collaboration to get across the finishing line in the shortest possible way. And those neoliberal principles have all sorts of disruptions and unforeseen circumstances. So the impact of coronavirus in China initially has actually led to a flow-on effect inside the United States. 90% of core components which are used in the US supply of antibiotics like amoxicillin, doxycycline, penicillin, and other drugs come from China. So the US Food and Drug Administration reported that a drug maker couldn't get those components, couldn't actually produce drugs for other purposes inside the United States. As China was the first to become the epicenter of the virus, they stepped up their demand for anesthetics like epinephrine and propofol and fentanyl, which then actually deprived export markets. Now, as those examples come from the dim distant past, probably 3 weeks ago. Since then, the epicenter has moved to Europe and onto the United States, but the disruption will be the same. Now we can assume with some certainty that the richer countries of Europe and North America will attempt to seize the materials that they need. Some of us were on a talk on Thursday night where we heard from comrades in France and Greece and the United States. The comrade in France talked about a consignment of, I think it was personal protection equipment, which was basically taken out of French hands by the Americans, being prepared to offer any price in order to get the resources. And then he said within a day or two, the French did exactly the same to a set of resources that were on their way via France to Sweden. It's a war of all against all. And Jonathan Quick from Duke University in the United States, who wrote a book, The End of Epidemics, said, epidemics will come to an end when there's virus biology and vaccine technology come into play, but politics and economics are far more likely to be the barrier to immunization. So even if one of those 35 outfits succeeds in creating a vaccine, who gets that vaccine will be determined by market power, not by human need. Neoliberal priorities have other flow-ons in this field. Back in 2014, and we're talking about Australia now, the government cut $111 million from the CSIRO. A chunk of that money was taken out of the budget for the Australian Animal Health Laboratory in Geelong. Now, that laboratory is one of the very, very few biosecurity level 4 labs in the world which has the facilities to work on dangerous pathogens. At the time, the CSIRO in Geelong was researching bird flu, SARS, and the Hendra virus. 2014 was the time of the Ebola virus. Clearly, the Australian government decided at that point that the Ebola virus was not a priority. It was basically killing poor black Africans. It wasn't likely to be killing people in Australia or Australians, and money was cut out of that laboratory. Not surprisingly, the government has now decided that that was possibly a mistake. And they've now announced they're going to put $220 million into upgrading the Geelong laboratories, which is very welcome news. The trouble is, you can't just go throw the switch and amplify the activity. It will be 2 years before that money is actually ploughed into new facilities, rebuilt laboratories and equipment. So the neoliberal priorities that kicked in 2014 actually make it more difficult for us to deal with the coronavirus problems we're facing today. And I suppose, and this is really the theme of the talk, the biggest problem is that big pharma, the big pharmaceutical companies go where the profits go. Between them, they gross 600 billion US a year. That's about $1 trillion Australian dollars. And that gives them massive market power. It means that they can sponsor and conduct trials. And Ben Goldacre, who wrote the book Bad Pharma, showed that the bias towards positive results is higher by a factor of almost 2/3 in research funded by industry. So straight away, there's an element of conducting trials to get the results that they want in order to be able to get drugs to market, in order to be able to make their profits. Alongside that, their market power also means they suppress the publication of negative results, but that puts medical professionals all the way down the line, all the way down to your local GP, at an enormous disadvantage, because if they don't know the real strengths or weaknesses of a particular drug, then they're blindfolded when it comes to making a judgment about what to prescribe, when to prescribe it. It also means that sometimes completely out of proportion results can echo through the system, results which really have no standing. So at the moment, everybody who listens to Fox News, and that means Donald Trump, is going crazy about hydroxychloroquine. There was a trial involving 26 people about that. It was cited by a Belgian, I think it was a Belgian, it was cited by a media outlet. It filtered through the alt-right universe, got onto Fox News. Trump started to talk about it. This is bad science. This is not the way in which you actually find drugs which are both efficacious and safe. And the power of the pharmaceutical industry also means that they can essentially allow or disallow the publication of papers in academic journals because funding is critical. And they can go to that point where Marx talked about with 300%. They will basically break laws. They will buy favours, they will employ ghostwriters, and they will go to outright fraud. And when they are pinged, GlaxoSmithKline, I think it is, was fined $3 billion for fraud. To them, that's petty cash. They're prepared to behave extremely badly in order to get a share of the enormous profits which are sloshing around. They also want to focus on drugs which they know will generate a profit. And part of that, because of copyright laws, is taking an existing drug, especially where it's coming towards the end of its copyright protection, tweaking it so it becomes a new drug with a new name, a new intellectual property protection, and putting it out on the market. In other words, the bias is towards improving what you've already got, or changing and tweaking what you've already got, rather than developing whole new sets of medication. I think another argument to raise with our Twitter friend, who I quoted at the beginning, is that this private money is being mobilised, all at its own risk. It's simply not true. Pharmaceutical companies, because they argue that research takes a very long time, can be very expensive, and doesn't necessarily lead to a successful outcome, can effectively put enormous pressure, and they do put enormous pressure on governments to subsidise their activities. So I mentioned Johnson & Johnson investing $1 billion in manufacturing facilities in preparation for what they hope will be a successful vaccine, but $421 million of that, so 42% of that investment is coming from the US government. They're hedging their bets. And over time, that factor is very, very strong indeed. So since the 1930s, the National Institutes of Health in the United States has put something like $900 billion into research with drug companies, which drug companies have then used to turn into medicines, which they patent to make the profit from. Every single drug in America, which was approved by the Food and Drug Administration between 2010 and 2016, involved science, which was funded by the National Institutes of Health at a cost of $100 billion in public tax dollars. And some of these drugs are huge earners. So one drug that really came out of public funding, but that was then privatized, was the HIV drug AZT or AZT, the cancer treatment Kymriah, which Novartis sells at $475,000 per, I assume per treatment rather than per individual application. Another drug which is in important use is the antiviral drug sofosbuvir, which is used to treat hepatitis C. That was also funded by the NIH in the States, and Gilead Sciences now owns that. Wasn't Gilead in Handmaid's Tale? This is spooky. Gilead Sciences now owns that drug, and it charges $1,000 per pill. It earned $44 billion from that drug during its first 3 years on the market. And you can imagine how much or little the pharmaceutical industry pays back in profits. They're some of the best at minimizing the amount they pay back into the public purse. So like all big companies, we see them queuing up today for government handouts, whether it's Qantas or Virgin or others. They're very, very good at arguing against the socialisation of profits, but very good at arguing for the privatisation of losses and for the government to underpin their profit making. To keep it that way, and this again is in the United States, in 2019, the pharmaceutical industry spent $295 million US on lobbying, more than any other sector. And throughout the Democratic primary, guess who got the largest amount of money from the pharmaceutical industry of all the candidates? If you said Bernie Sanders, go and stand in a corner, you've let yourself down. It was Joe Biden. Joe Biden is the safe candidate for the pharmaceutical industry. And no doubt, if and when he wins in November, he will deliver by making sure that they get on with profit making. Meanwhile, top lobbyists from Eli Lilly and Gilead are on the White House coronavirus task force. So they are literally in charge of the blood bank. The people who are making the profits out of coronavirus are in charge of public policy over coronavirus. More broadly, and so obviously coronavirus is one where the pharmaceutical companies think they can make money, but they think they can make money because there are many, many millions of people sick or potentially sick with this in the advanced countries of industrial capitalism, in Western Europe, in East Asia, and in North America. These are people, or either individuals or governments, who have money and will pay for cures. And pharmaceutical companies judge whether or not to invest essentially on whether or not there's a market for their goods. So they really love things like cholesterol tablets or arthritis treatments because they know there's a relatively affluent marketplace of people who will take these tablets not for a few days or a few weeks, but in some cases for a lifetime. And we can throw in, of course, drugs designed to ameliorate mental health issues as well. Pharmaceutical companies are really not very keen on drugs which are either difficult to develop or which are only taken for short periods or are taken or would be taken by the wrong people. So, for instance, one of the reasons why we are behind, humanity is behind the 8 ball on developing a coronavirus vaccine is that work did begin on coronavirus vaccines with the SARS outbreak in China between 2002 2004, and the MERS outbreak, which began in Saudi Arabia in 2012. Both of them, I'm not a scientist, but both of them obviously have elements in common with COVID. But in both cases, the epidemics did not become pandemics. They were localized, they were damaging, but they were localized and they were snuffed out. And in both cases, the research was simply put to one side. So years of potential preparation for a coronavirus COVID-19 outbreak, which is entirely foreseeable, not the nature of the drug, nature of the vaccine, of the virus specifically, but the fact that there could be a pandemic of that sort has been known for some time, for a long time, but big business will not put money into research unless there's an immediate market. Then you've got a different sort of problem around the question of antibiotics. Antibiotics, I think we underestimate. All of us have been born in the era of antibiotics, basically, I think, since the end of the Second World War. Antibiotics have added between 10 and 20 years to global life expectancy. So for some people, life expectancy has gone from 50 to 60, in some cases from 50 to 71 years. We take antibiotics for granted, but their effectiveness is increasingly difficult and restricted because of superbugs, which are resistant, which have become resistant to antibiotics. That's a really scary situation, which threatens not just the immediate health, but the life expectancy, potentially of millions, if not billions, of human beings. But large pharmaceutical companies have essentially abandoned the field when it comes to developing new antibiotics. There's a few niche operators on the fringe of the market. And the reason for that is people take on antibiotics for a short period. You go to the doctor, you've got a bad infection on your finger, you get a treatment. 9 times out of 10, within 2 weeks, the infection's cleared up. You're not taking antibiotics anymore. That means the profitability for the company has ceased to exist. So there is no base of long-term customers who will use the drug over and over again. And so Big Pharma is much less interested. You can see that really sharply with situations with diseases which affect primarily the global south, the poorest people in the world. So Ebola is much, much more dangerous than COVID-19. It's a horrible disease where people die in agony and bleed out and all the rest of it. But it is overwhelmingly a disease which has taken from time to time, has emerged in Central Africa and has been contained within Central Africa. That means there is virtually no interest amongst big pharma in coming up with a vaccine or a cure of some sort for Ebola. Some publicly funded researchers in Canada did come up with something as early as 2003. It wasn't until there was a political pressure and panic around an outbreak in West Africa in 2014 that a US pharmaceutical company, Merck, finally agreed to conduct the necessary clinical trials. Essentially, from the point of view of Big Pharma, the lives of poor black people in Africa, people who can't afford to pay and whose governments can't afford to pay, are dispensable. You can see that again with malaria. 85% of malaria cases worldwide within 19 countries in sub-Saharan Africa and in India. And there are 6 countries which account for more than half of all malaria cases worldwide. Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Uganda, Cote d'Ivoire, Mozambique, and Niger. All countries, Nigeria is a larger economy, but still all sorts of problems. All the others, very, very poor. Countries which have been ravaged by imperialism and then by corrupt local users. Malaria leads to many, many deaths. In 2018, the toll was down to a mere 405,000. Unlike COVID-19, it affects the young more than the old. 2/3 of those deaths in 2018 were children under 5 years of age. In that same year, there was a total investment of $2.7 billion in malaria control and elimination efforts. So not just drugs, but also just basic steps like spraying stagnant water and the like. And you think, well, that's not too bad, $2.7 billion, but it was down from the year before, which was $3.2 billion. And the World Health Organization estimates it would be at least $5 billion needed in order to bring malaria under control, to snuff it out, the stagnant water where malarial mosquitoes breed, but also to actually deal with the disease itself. Meanwhile, 2.7 billion, not too bad. Meanwhile, in 2013 alone, US pharmaceutical companies spent $40 billion on research and development inside the United States. And so what you begin to get is a picture of racist contempt, as well as contempt for humans in general, a specific contempt for people of colour, something which people are increasingly talking about in terms of the COVID-19 outbreak itself. And there's some really powerful stuff. There's an article Solidarity has just shared on Twitter from The Guardian about the impact of race and class in the United States, particularly in New York. But it runs all the way through the process. So some of the racism is sort of implicit. If they can't afford to buy the drugs, we're not interested in developing the medicine. Some of it is explicit. People may well have seen the clip of two French doctors having an earnest discussion on national television about why any any vaccine developed to deal with COVID-19 should be trialled in Africa, precisely because there is no health system. There are no masks, there are no preventions, and therefore black Africans are effectively guinea pigs at ground zero who could be used. Absolute racist contempt. And they're building on the fact that imperialism and neoliberalism have ripped resources out of Africa. In South Africa, there are fewer than 1,000 intensive care unit, ICU beds, with a population of 56 million. In Zimbabwe, in Harare, the capital, the infectious diseases hospital has 0 ICU beds. So the media is beginning to talk about flattening the curve in places like Australia and New Zealand and a few other places. Let's not be complacent. Coronavirus is a global pandemic, and it is only just beginning to gather steam in the global south, in countries where there is virtually no protection. In Syria, absolutely ravaged by civil war. In the northeastern province, there are 2 million people and 10 ventilators. In the northwestern province, Idlib, which is under siege from Syria and Russia and is also dominated from the north by Turkey, there are 4 million people, including 1 million internal refugees. There are only 3 hospitals with equipment. And doctors are talking about 100,000 deaths from coronavirus in Idlib alone. So, to bring this together and to bring the threads together, pharmaceutical companies are enormously profitable. The top 10 companies globally made $150 billion in profit in 2019, which they then parlay over into political influence, medical influence, intellectual influence, in order to guarantee the virtuous cycle of profit making, but whatever the opposite of virtuous is, evil cycle of profit making. Very often they have the facilities, the researchers, in order to conduct the research, and therefore they will actually pick and choose what drugs are developed, who gets them, when they get them, and how much they will pay for them. This is a total indictment of capitalism, a total indictment of a society where profit is put before human need. The tweet I referred to at the very start talked about private enterprise doing all these wonderful things, or else we'd be digging plague pits. We've all seen they're digging plague pits in New York. The spiritual centre of unbridled private enterprise is burying people in plain pine coffins in paupers' graves on an island just off the coast of New York City. Capitalism is bringing us the plague pits. So what do we say as socialists? I mean, obviously, our first step right now is to demand a retooling of industry, as many workers have been arguing for, to produce the PPE, to produce the ventilators. But also we demand right now that there is a consolidation of research, that individual competition between companies and countries and universities, whatever, is put to one side, and there is a common combined effort to come up with a vaccine, because the reality is we're in for a cycle of lockdowns and infection until such time as there is a vaccine. This is a very real and immediate problem. But in broader terms, our argument is that drug research should be taken out of private hands. This is a public good. It's a public good as much as water, as much as housing, as much as the broader health system. If we've learned anything in the last few months and the last few weeks, it is that private enterprise fails over and over again, and we need public intervention. It's bizarre to say that, well, at the moment, the face of the limited or the distorted public intervention is Scott Morrison, but as socialists, we're talking about public intervention under the control and under the direction of the working class, of the mass of the population, where drugs research is oriented to cures and innovative treatments. And those are cures and innovative treatments for diseases which are not profitable for the current system, diseases and conditions which may only be experienced by a very small proportion of the population. Big Pharma's not interested in them. If only 0.1% of the population has that disease, they can't make a profit. So we are for the democratic public ownership and control and direction of drug research. There should be no drug patents. South Africa, I think from memory, did a very valuable thing at the height of the HIV/AIDS outbreak and made generic AZT and said, fuck you, basically, to the patent laws. We're not going to let people, not going to let people die. Drug patents are there to protect profits. They're not there to protect people. Research results should be open access. They should be shared across the entire scientific community. We want to get rid of duplicate research. We want to go towards cooperation. Actually, everything we say about Big Pharma is really the argument we say about society as a whole. Capitalism has failed us. It has failed us fundamentally. Many, many millions are paying the price right now. Even when this crisis is over, millions will continue to pay the price, both medically and through all the other horrors like climate change that capitalism brings us. There has never been a better time to demand a completely different way of organising society.